Hello and welcome to another video on the channel. This past weekend I was at Silverstone, racing on the same weekend as the Walter Haynes Trophy, with the main event being the Formula Ford Grand Finale. The car for the weekend was this beast, the Mazda MX5 Cup car. A standard Mazda MX5, but stripped out of any useless parts and a roll cage for extra racing performance. This weekend was all about one thing, however, and that was signatures. Jumping straight into qualifying then. I had to start from the pit lane instead of Brooklands dummy grid, as in the previous practice session I was called up to the stewards for abusing track limits. Now this was mainly because of the damp conditions and for the fact I was driving this car for the very first time. So therefore I was sent out behind the entire pack and had a little less time to get into the groove. One thing I learned about this car very quickly is that it is skittish. I've just come out the pits here and I am on road tyres, but even through this flat out kink here, which is normally flat, I'm really struggling to hold on to the car. As you can see through these montage of clips, that this thing is ready to turn and swap ends at any moment, and it doesn't give you any warning whatsoever. So it's sort of like a go-kart in a sense that I'm backing it into the corner everywhere. Unfortunately, however, tragedy did strike going through Luffield on lap 8. I've gone in there a little bit too hot, and that snap of oversteer there has sent me straight into the gravel trap. How embarrassing. However, I did manage to keep the car rolling and I did escape the gravel trap, unfortunately leaving my dignity behind with it. So, as I come across the line to take the checkered flag and P9 on the starting grid, I think it's a good time to remind you to subscribe to the channel. We're so close to 1,000 subscribers, so subscribing, liking the video and sharing would be amazing. Now, I'm racing on this day for signatures like I said before. This means I cannot have any incidents whatsoever. The reason why I'm doing this is that the championship I plan to do next year requires an international level licence, which is achieved through having enough signatures by competing in enough races cleanly. So it's safe to say, after winding up in the gravel trap, I've not really had the best start to getting this signature under my belt. After qualifying in a strong P9, there was a long break in which we could watch some of the Formula Ford races and watch them carry out some exciting racing. Soon enough, however, I was back on track and back on a slipperier surface, ready for the race and hoping to get a signature to be able to compete for next year. Now, as we exit the correct pits this time, as you can see, this is not your usual race, as not all these cars are Mazdas quite clearly. And in fact, there's all types of cars in this race: radicals, GT4s, historic cars, and even some homebrew race cars. This is more of a fun cup rather than a serious race. However, it still provides a signature which I desperately need. As I come to the end of my formation lap, reality is starting to set in a little bit. I've never actually done a standing start before, and what makes it worse is that today is wet. And as you saw in the qualifying session earlier, this thing likes to break traction a lot, so I didn't really know what I was getting myself into. All I could do now is wait for the grid to form up and the lights to go out. Safe to say my first ever start was absolutely horrendous, plagued by wheel spin, mainly because I've never done a start before, but I don't reckon the road tyres on a wet slippery surface helped either. But it was a good thing that we didn't lose any positions. Unfortunately, it was just time. My goal now was to focus and go forwards as much as I could. Unfortunately, I couldn't really do that because on my left hand side comes zooming a radical looking car and a big snap of oversteer going into turn 2. As we cut through Maggotts and Beckett's to try go on to the Wellington Straight, you can see how much I'm wrestling the car in these damp and oily conditions, and how much of a poor run I've got onto the Wellington Straight. As you can see in the bottom left hand corner with the rear view camera, there's a car right up my gearbox with a little bit more top speed than I do going into Brooklands. And as I'm only racing for signatures, I don't really want to fight him too much, but I've been quite ginger on my entry into Brooklands and he's gone clean round the outside of me. He's absolutely mugged me off. I usually wouldn't let that happen too often, but as I am racing for signatures and signatures only, I don't try to fight back too much or do anything audacious. But with the extra momentum I've got off of Luffield by taking the wider line, I'm thinking about maybe going back up the inside, but I do think better of it. I don't really want to be smashing into the side of him and causing a potential accident, as I know for a fact that gives me a good chance of landing up in the steward's office, which I really don't need, because it puts my signatures at risk, which I so desperately need at this point. I know after qualifying that I am a decent chunk quicker than him, so I can get past him, but I can't allow for any errors or any incident to take place whatsoever. So I just bide my time and settle into the race for a little bit and gain confidence in these tricky conditions. Bizarrely, a couple laps later, going into the first corner, we both end up going really deep, but unfortunately I come off a lot worse as I'm having to ride the brakes for longer, and it means due to my lack of power as well, it's cost me a lot of time, and the gap has just opened up massively to the car in front. Only half a lap later, however, I'm right back on him, and going into Brooklands I gained quite a bit on the brakes. Over the last couple of laps I've been studying his lines, and they seem to be working quite well at this stage of the race, so I just stick to copying them. I know the outside line round Luffield is a lot better, especially for the exit, so I take the wider line and try and get as good as possible exit as I possibly can, so I can maybe set up a move going into the first corner. I've come out of Luffield with so much more momentum and speed than he has, but it fizzles out as he's got a little bit more power, so I know I can't overtake him conventionally just by going alongside him, so I'm going to have to send it straight up the inside into Copse, thinking about changing to third, stick it in fourth, and I managed to get the job done, or so it's thought, as I had two massive moments of oversteer and large amounts of opposite lock, which has ruined my momentum out the corner, and therefore he's right on the attack again, so I go defensive, he goes to the left hand side, I've got the inside of the corner, I brake a little bit deep to make sure I can square off the corner as much as possible, and get the foot down as early as I can to get as much purchase off the corner as I can, to make sure that he can't overtake me onto this next straight, and I do just that, keeping him behind me for the time being at least. However, it's not over just yet. The Mini Cooper is still wedged firmly up my gearbox as a radical lapsus during this race, and going into Brooklands I make sure that I don't make the same mistake twice and brake late enough so he can't drift around my outside. However, in the rearview mirror you can see a Porsche GT4 nearly takes me out of the race just there. There must have not been anything more than a cigarette paper width between us two, but I do see him last minute and just let him go through Luffield to avoid any further incidences. Another radical I point through there, which seems to have held up the Mini Cooper quite substantially, and I just focus about setting out some good laps and putting some distance between me and the car behind. So that's exactly what I said about doing. Nice consistent laps and building up faster and faster as I gain more experience. Putting a 20.9, quickly followed up by a 20.7, then a 20.3 a little lap after, then a 20.2 a couple laps after that, and then improving to this lap, which was my best lap of the entire event, and mainly because I wasn't overtaken on this lap, and therefore I wasn't held up by people lapping me, or any slower cars for that matter of fact, but it was also my best lap hooked up as well, and I knew when I completed the lap, even though I didn't have a data logger on board, that would be my fastest lap. One of the main differences that I noticed whilst watching this footage back is that I've got a lot more confidence in the car with car control. As you can see here, I'm fighting the car and sliding it round so I can be able to carry just that little bit extra corner speed around the corner, which will help me massively down the main straight here. The same was true for Brooklands as well. As the session progressed, I could feel myself just being able to brake a little bit later as I gained more confidence from having the car a little bit more on edge. It just meant that I could put my braking distance further down the track and carry more speed into the corner, whilst also using more of the grip available to me around it as well as I'm carrying more speed. It was a really good day for learning how to drive a new car and being able to adapt quite quickly. This car, although it doesn't have a lot of power and requires on momentum mainly, doesn't have a lot of traction either. So it's a fine balance of being able to just get a lot out of a little situation. So after putting in the 19.6, a couple laps later the checkered flag came down, and I was quite relieved to see that as the race was dragging on a little bit and the rain seemed to have got heavier as the race progressed. just here I'm thanking the marshals, as they definitely had the hardest job out of everyone this weekend. The weather was absolutely cruel to them all weekend, so I'd just like to thank them for their hard work. But overall, I was really happy to know that I'd ticked off another signature on my tally, of which I needed to compete in the championship for next year. So it was overall a positive day, full of learning, and ultimately another signature in the books, which was the most important thing out of the day. I'd just like to thank everyone who stuck around to the end of this video and watched the whole thing. If you've not done so already, please make sure you like and subscribe. It's really appreciated. And yeah, I'll catch you next time.